From The Athletic. He's a Utah Utes beat writer. It's Chris Kamrani, who has been covering Jason Shelley for quite some time. And now Jason Shelley, of course, is headed to Logan to go play football. I guess he is in Logan to play football for the Utah State Aggies. And want to get Chris's thoughts on Jason, on what kind of football player was in Utah, what the Aggies can expect from him, but also news today: the Pac-12 schedule has came out, and what does Ute Nation think of that Pac-12 schedule? Chris, thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, let's start here. Jason Shelley does leave Utah. He goes to Logan. What brings Jason Shelley here? Was it him contacting Gary, or did Gary contact him? What's that relationship that brings Jason to Logan?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen now the last couple of years is that Gary has utilized that year back in Salt Lake to his advantage, being up in Logan. You look at what he was able to do, getting guys like COC Mariner and Caleb Rep and Nick Henninger up there after year one. And now he gets Jason Shelley and then most recently Devontae Henry Cole. So clearly Gary's developed a pseudo pipeline from Salt Lake to Logan. And I mean, I think it's a fit, frankly. I think what Gary wants to do offensively as a, spread offense look, Jason provides that. I mean, that's what he was as a high school quarterback. That's what he was when he was at Utah, when he had time as a starter. And, it's I don't think it's going to be a huge leap for Jason to go. I think he's going to be the starter, assuming that the Mountain West has a season in 2020. So I think it's going to be an interesting fit. I also think Devontae Henry Cole will be an interesting fit too, because I think when he decided to go to BYU, a lot of people assumed that he was going down there to vie for a starting job. But now I think, considering where BYU is, kind of up against it with losing so many different opponents due to Power 5 conferences dropping non-conference schedules, I figure Devontae was like, hey, I can go play with one of my closest friends still in Utah and be up in Logan and compete with Jalen Warren for that starting running back spot.
Chris, I want to get back to Devontae Henry Cole in just a moment, but with Jason Shelley, he's a guy that started 5 games for the Utes, Pac-12 competition, 3-2 in those games. How effective is he as a starting quarterback? Here's a guy who had his shot, but consistently had other opportunities that others kept getting in front of him to get additional shots. So really, we see that he started games, he won some games, but he also had other guys keep getting in front of him, and he was even going to change positions.
Yeah, it's tough because he replaced Tyler Huntley when Tyler went down for the year in 2018, and obviously went 3-1 down the stretch, or 3-0 down the stretch rather, before the Pac-12 championship game. And obviously, Utah lost to Oregon and Northwestern in those last 2 games, but it's tough to kind of understand, what Jason was going through at the time, because here's a kid that really had never started before, and all of a sudden he's thrust into the mix with Tyler going down, and we can't forget either that Zach Moss got hurt at that same time too. So what Jason's skill set provides, I think, is outside of his physical attributes. Obviously, he's a shorter quarterback, but he's very dynamic. He has a good arm. He can escape the pocket. He can stay in the pocket if he wants, but considering what he was able to do at Utah, I think he goes down in his time at Utah as one of the most popular players during his time there. I mean, like, everybody loved Jason, and I think if you're a quarterback, if you're a starting quarterback, that's what you want out of that guy that's going to be leading the team. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how he takes the mantle, because, again, here's a guy that, took Utah to the Pac-12 title game in 2018, and then last year was dropped to the third-string quarterback after Drew Lisk became the second-string quarterback behind Tyler Huntley. There's a coordinator change there, so that tends to happen. And obviously, Utah asked Jason to move to safety before the bowl game against Texas in the Alamo Bowl, and he obviously wasn't happy about it, and he wasn't going to make us think about it publicly, but he always wanted to be a starting quarterback. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the pipeline that Gary's kind of created for himself is a positive, because I think if there are guys in Utah's program that maybe can't get the amount of minutes they want, but they're still Pac-12 caliber players, and I think Utah State would be happy to have those guys come over and be stars. I mean, frankly, like CSC Mariner was one of the best wide receivers in the Mountain West Conference last year, and now he got signed by the Raiders, but as an undrafted free agent. I also think Caleb Rep will be a really good tight end too. So it's just one of those things that I think Jason has the ability, but we really haven't seen that borne out totally because he hasn't necessarily been given the keys to the car yet. And now it seems like he has that opportunity in front of him.
Chris, if there's one thing that concerns you about Jason Shelley at quarterback, a weakness that he may have, it would be what?
I'd just say inexperience. Here's a guy that started 5 games. I just think that, and that those 5 games were going to be 2 years prior to when he suits up this fall. I mean, he just doesn't have a lot of experience as a quarterback. He has the intangibles to be good, and clearly he got the job when Tyler went down. But like I said, that was a previous offensive coordinator who had built a system specifically around dual threat quarterbacks. Now, obviously, Bodie Reeder can do whatever he wants to do and build an offense around Jason if he wants it to be more spread. It's just going to be an interesting fit because when Jason was the starter at Utah, Utah was running the ball 30 times a game, and Jason was throwing 15 to 20 times. A lot of those times were off play action. I don't necessarily think Utah State's going to have that kind of look in 2020. I could be wrong. But I think when you're looking at what Jason needs to improve on, accuracy, comfort in the pocket, just overall experience, and obviously Utah State felt like they were going to be the program that can give him that shot.
So I want to ask you similarly about Devontae Henry Cole. Here's a running back who had opportunities at Utah, was going to go to BYU. Now he's coming to Utah State. We haven't seen a lot of tape on him. He hasn't played in a lot of games. But again, here's another guy who looked like he had some opportunities maybe, but kept finding himself a little bit deeper on the depth chart than apparently where he wanted.
Yeah, that's a tough one too because, again, anytime you're playing behind the greatest running back in the history of a program that's known for having really good running backs, touches are going to be a little limited there, guys. And I think, Devontae's situation is pretty similar to that of Jason's. Like he wanted more minutes, he wanted more reps, he wanted a shot at being a starter, but as the years went on, he just wasn't going to get that shot. And you guys know, like college football, no one's going to wait around for you. And Devontae did have some tough breaks. I mean, he suffered a season-ending injury a couple years ago. He broke his arm and was out for the entire year and was kind of behind the 8 ball in that sense. And Utah goes on. Zach Moss keeps being Zach Moss, and Utah recruits a couple highly sought-after running backs, and all of a sudden Devontae's 3rd or 4th or 5th on the depth chart. That being said, he's a change of pace back. He's the type of guy that he's an interesting case because he's small, but he's stout. But he was more, like I said, a change of pace back at Utah, a guy that's comfortable catching the ball out of the backfield. And I think if you're looking for an ideal complement to what Jaylen Warren presents at Utah State, who's kind of that tough, bruising presence, I think Devontae could present that sort of off balance for a defense to have to deal with.
The Aggies have been known for the last couple, maybe 3 years, because of Jordan Love to be an in-pocket quarterback team. Nothing too fancy with the quarterback. Does Jason Shelley change all that with his great mobility?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think a lot of that, again, if we're talking about what Utah State can do to build around Jason, I think you also have to talk about what kind of weapons are going to be at his disposal. Obviously, Jordan was who he was, especially in 2018, because of the insane amount of talent he had around him on the outside. Obviously, he wasn't the exact same quarterback in 2019, but it's going to be one of those things where Utah State's going to have to figure out where its strengths are on offense, and if they're going to be comfortable with keeping Jason upright and healthy, that's another thing. I mean, if you want to use Utah as an example, Tyler Huntley got beat up a lot in his last few years outside of his senior year because he was running a lot. And to your point, Jordan was the guy that wanted to stay in the pocket and throw, and he didn't get hit all that much, at least up until 2019. So it's one of those things like, does Utah State feel comfortable enough with its quarterback depth to turn Jason loose and risk him getting hurt? Because now all of a sudden, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but with Henry leaving, they have now they just have a bunch of young guys behind Jason. So it would be interesting to see how comfortable they are with their quarterback depth at that point.
Again, we're talking to Chris Kamrani. He is a beat writer for The Athletic, covering the Utah Utes. And speaking of the Utes and the Pac-12, the Pac-12 released their schedule for this upcoming season. We already know that with this announcement, doing conference only, Utah State had preseason games or pre-conference games with Washington State and Washington scheduled. We've known now for a few weeks that wasn't going to happen. But now Utah knows what their schedule is going to look like. What was that? And I know this announcement just happened earlier this afternoon. I know it's very fresh. What's the initial reaction to this schedule announcement today?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because they basically reconfigured the entire thing for all 12 teams. Once they decided to go conference only, they gave themselves about 3 weeks to get this format and blueprint together. First blush, Utah's first 5 weeks are all winnable. I mean, they start off on the road at Wazoo in Colorado, 2 programs with brand new coaches. They get a home game against Oregon State, who's been terrible the last few years. Friday night game at UCLA, which could be tricky. Then you get a bye, and then you get Arizona at home. Then they have probably the most difficult run out of any team in the Pac-12. They're at ASU, home to Washington, at Cal, home to SC on a Friday night, and then the added team as the 10th team is the reigning Rose Bowl champions and winners of the Pac-12 a year ago, Oregon, who come to town on December 5th. So for what's going to be the youngest Utah team that Kyle Whittingham has ever had, and don't forget, guys, that Kyle's been a coach at Utah since 1994, so this is going to be his 26th year as a coach or head coach at Utah. He said this is by far the youngest team that he's ever going to have. The fact that they can get a manageable start can maybe, use that coach speak, provide them some sort of momentum going into that final 5 weeks, because that back end of the schedule is going to be brutal for them.
I know you do cover the Utah Utes, but that team down south that wears the blue, they're in a heap amount of trouble because of the SEC's announcement of conference only. Have you heard anything on what maybe the rivals of the Utes, the Cougars, will be doing as a schedule?
No, I haven't. I mean, they're in a tough spot, frankly, with the Big Ten starting it, then the Pac-12 following suit, then the SEC announcing this week that they're going to conference only. That drops all of BYU's kind of premier opponents on the schedule. Obviously, they still get to keep the Mountain West schools. They get to keep the rivalry date with Utah State. But right now, it's going to be tough to see how they figure out how to fill the rest of those spots in 2020. They might have to see if somebody lets them into a conference look this year. I know there were some rumors about the Big 12 potentially letting them in, but those were quickly shot down. I mean, I think there was a lot of flack given to the BYU athletic department based on their move to the independent route so many years ago. And I think, obviously nobody could have planned for a pandemic and for it to hit the way it did in this country, and we're all in a terrible spot. So I know it's easy to say that, independence is the worst way to go. But if you're not Notre Dame, you're kind of left out in the cold right now, and BYU has to figure out and get somebody to lend them an olive branch.
Chris, we know you're being pulled in all sorts of directions for interviews, and so we'll let you go, but we can't thank you enough for joining us today. Great stuff, and wish you the best.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.